The darkness of space tore open like fabric being ripped apart. One by one, massive ships appeared near Jupiter's orbit. They were not human ships. The vessels stretched for miles, their hulls covered in strange metals that seemed to drink in the light from distant stars. By the time the last ship materialized, there were 847 of them hanging in the void like predators waiting to strike. On Earth Defense Station Olympus, alarms screamed through every corridor. Captain sat in his command chair, watching the sensor displays with calm eyes that betrayed none of the fear churning in his gut. He had trained for this moment his entire career, but training and reality were very different things. "Sir, they're broadcasting on all frequencies," his communications officer reported, her voice tight with tension. "Put it through," said quietly. The message was simple and had been delivered to 200 worlds before Earth. The Empire was claiming this solar system. Humanity had 24 hours to surrender completely or be destroyed. All resources would belong to the Empire. All humans would serve as workers in colonies. There would be no negotiation. Deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Admiral stood in the command center that humanity had built in absolute secrecy. The room was carved from solid rock, shielded from every known form of detection. Around her, dozens of officers worked at their stations, their faces lit by the glow of screens showing the alien fleet. "Get the president on the line," ordered, "and wake up Doctor, tell him it's time." Was 60 years old and had spent 40 of those years preparing for this exact scenario. When she was a child, humanity had nearly destroyed itself in a global war that left millions dead and entire cities turned to glass. The survivors had made a choice then. Never again would humanity be defenseless. Never again would they be victims. President appeared on the main screen, his face grave. Behind him could see the emergency bunker where the government had relocated. "How long do we have?" he asked. "They said 24 hours, but we should assume they'll attack sooner," replied. "These species always do. They think we're primitives who won't resist." "Can we fight them?" Allowed herself a thin smile. "Mr. President, we've been building our defense for 80 years. Every scientist, every engineer, every resource we could spare has gone into one purpose. Yes, we can fight them. The question is whether we should try talking first." President nodded slowly. "Prepare everything, I'll try to reason with them. Maybe they'll listen." But in his heart, he knew they wouldn't. On the command ship, Commander X studied the blue and green planet on his displays. It was beautiful in the way that all living worlds were beautiful, and soon it would belong to his empire. This was his 200th conquest. The species living there wouldn't even register as a challenge. "What defenses do they have?" he asked his tactical officer. "Primitive nuclear weapons, sir. Some orbital platforms with kinetic launchers. A few hundred fighters that use chemical propulsion. Their largest warship is less than a kilometer long. They don't even have a proper shield technology." X laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "And they think they can resist the Empire. Have they responded to our message?" "Yes, sir. They're requesting a dialogue. They claim to have defensive capabilities we should be aware of." "Of course they do," X said dismissively. "They all say that. Send a response. Tell them we're not interested in their primitive threats. They have 24 hours to submit or die." Back on Earth, Doctor arrived at the mountain facility within an hour. He was a thin man in his 50s, with gray hair and hands that trembled slightly from too much coffee and too little sleep. For 30 years, he had led the Aegis Project, humanity's most classified program. Only a few hundred people knew it existed. Even fewer understood what it truly was. "Show me the fleet," he said as he entered the control room. The displays lit up with the formation. Studied them carefully, his mind already calculating trajectories and power requirements. They're positioned exactly as the simulations predicted. Confident, aggressive, no defensive spacing. "Can the system handle this many targets?" Admiral asked. Nodded slowly. We built it to handle 5,000 simultaneous targets. This is well within parameters. But Admiral, once we activate Aegis, there's no going back. The galaxy will know what we have, what we can do. Better they know and fear us than think we're easy prey, said firmly. Captain continued his attempts at communication from the defense station. He explained that Earth had survived its own wars, that humanity understood violence and had chosen a different path, that they should reconsider their approach. The response came from Envoy as a diplomat whose message dripped with contempt. Your species has not even colonized your own moon. You have no colonies, no empire, no fleet worth mentioning. You are insects claiming to be dragons. Submit now and some of you will be allowed to live. Closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with new resolve. Then I'm required to inform you that we have a defensive system in place. It is lethal beyond anything you've encountered. This is your only warning. Turn back now or face consequences you cannot imagine. The response was laughter. In the mountain facility, President addressed the alien fleet one final time via quantum transmission. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of an entire species. We have given you 24 hours. That is 23 hours and 45 minutes more than we need. We don't want war. We don't want to destroy you, but we will not be slaves. This is your last chance. Turn back. Commander X didn't even bother responding. He gave the order to advance immediately. The fleet began moving toward Earth, weapons charging, shields at maximum. They would teach these primitives what happened to species who refused the Empire. On Earth, every human holding a command position felt their hearts sink and harden at the same moment. The aliens had made their choice. Now humanity would make theirs. The fleet moved through the solar system like a swarm of mechanical locusts, passing Mars without slowing. Their sensors swept everything, cataloging Earth's defenses with dismissive efficiency. They saw exactly what they expected to see: orbital weapons platforms that couldn't penetrate their shields, nuclear missiles that were centuries outdated by galactic standards, and a small collection of defensive stations that looked more decorative than functional. Lieutenant sat at her communications console aboard Defense Station Olympus, her hands hovering over the controls. She had a message ready to send, one that Captain had dictated carefully. It was humanity's final attempt at making them understand what they were walking into. "Send it," said quietly. Press the transmission key. The message carried every technical specification of the battles humanity had fought against itself. The nuclear exchanges that had vaporized cities, the biological weapons that had nearly sterilized continents, the orbital bombardments that had turned fertile land into radioactive deserts, and then, most importantly, it carried the message of what came after. 80 years ago, we nearly killed ourselves, the message began. We had weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we almost used them all. 3 billion people died in those wars. When the survivors emerged from the ashes, they made a decision. Never again would we be vulnerable. Never again would we be helpless. The message continued, detailing how humanity had unified in a way no species had before. Every nation, every government, every military force had merged into one purpose. The entire global economy had been restructured. Universities became weapons laboratories. Corporations became defense contractors. Every brilliant mind was directed toward a single question: how do we make sure no one can ever threaten us again? We spent 80 years building something, the message concluded. We didn't build it to conquer. We built it to survive. You still have time to turn back. This is not a bluff. This is not a negotiation. This is a simple warning from one intelligent species to another. Leave now or face what we have built. In the command ship, Envoy read the message with growing amusement. He had seen this kind of psychological warfare before. Primitive species always tried to seem more dangerous than they were. It was like an insect puffing itself up to scare a predator. They're threatening us with their history of self-destruction, as reported to Commander X. They claim to have unified their entire planet and built some kind of. Have our scanners detected any unusual energy signatures? X asked. Nothing beyond normal planetary power generation. Some quantum computing facilities, basic fusion reactors, electromagnetic research stations, all primitive technology. X studied the tactical display. The human defensive platforms were spreading out, creating a perimeter around their planet. It was a standard defensive formation that wouldn't accomplish anything against modern weapons. What kind of could they have built with such limited technology? None, sir, it's a bluff. Then we'll call it, continue our approach, charge all weapons, prepare to demonstrate what real power looks like. Deep in the mountain facility, Doctor watched the fleet advance on the main display. Around him, his team worked frantically at their stations, running final checks on systems that had never been tested at full power. Engineer called out status reports in a steady stream. Satellite network is at full operational status. All 300 nodes are responding. Quantum entanglement is stable. Singularity generators are charged and ready. Power levels, Doctor asked. We're pulling energy from every reactor on the planet. The grid is stressed but holding. We have enough power for a full discharge. Doctor felt sweat running down his back despite the cool air in the control room. The Aegis system was theoretical physics made real, built by taking humanity's most dangerous ideas and pushing them to their limits. They had asked a simple question: what's the one thing that no shield, no armor, no defense in the universe can stop? The answer was gravity itself. How long until they're in range? Admiral asked. At their current speed, 6 hours, Doctor replied. But they could attack from their current position if they wanted to. They're just being arrogant. Good, arrogance makes them predictable. President entered the control room, his face showing the exhaustion of a man who hadn't slept in 30 hours. Have they responded to our last warning? Yes, sir, Lieutenant's voice came through the speakers. They said, and I quote, "Your warning is noted and dismissed as the desperate lies of a dying species. Prepare for your new role as servants of the Empire." Closed his eyes. He had hoped, against all reason, that they would choose differently, that some alien species out in the galaxy might value life over conquest. He had been wrong. "Admiral, you have authorization to activate Aegis on your discretion," said formally. "May whatever gods exist forgive us for what we're about to do." "Sir, with respect, we're not the ones who need forgiveness," replied. "They chose this." On the ships, crew members went about their duties with practiced efficiency. Most of them had done this dozens of times before. Arrive at a primitive world, make threats, occasionally destroy a city or two as a demonstration, and watch the locals surrender. This conquest would be over by dinner. Reviewed the tactical data from his station. Something was bothering him, a detail that didn't quite fit. The humans had scattered satellites throughout their solar system, far more than a species at their technology level would need for communication or observation. The satellites appeared to be research stations, but their power signatures were oddly uniform. "Commander, I'm detecting some unusual orbital structures," reported. "What kind of structures?" "I'm not certain, sir. They're distributed in a grid pattern throughout the inner solar system. 300 confirmed positions. They appear to be scientific research platforms." "What's unusual about research platforms?" "They're all active simultaneously, sir, and they're drawing enormous amounts of power from the planet's surface, far more than research would require." X frowned. "Could they be weapons platforms?" "I don't see how, sir. They're not pointed at us. They're just floating in space, drawing power." "Keep monitoring them. Inform me if anything changes." Acknowledged the order, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave him. Something about this conquest felt wrong. In the mountain facility, scientist ran calculations on her workstation, double-checking the quantum mathematics that made Aegis possible. The system worked on a principle that most species would consider insane, creating hundreds of microscopic black holes simultaneously and positioning them with perfect accuracy. Each singularity would exist for less than half a second, but in that brief moment, they would generate gravitational forces strong enough to tear apart anything nearby. "Doctor, the calculations are confirmed," reported. "We can target every ship in their fleet simultaneously. The gravitational shear will be catastrophic." "Will there be survivors?" Doctor asked quietly. Hesitated. She knew what he was really asking. "Will we be killing everyone on those ships?" "No, sir. At these power levels, nothing will survive. Not even their escape pods will make it out in time." Doctor nodded slowly. He had known the answer, but hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that data never could. They weren't building a weapon to disable ships or force surrender. They had built something that would erase the entire fleet from existence in seconds. "May they forgive us in whatever afterlife they believe in," he whispered. The fleet continued its advance, confident and unstoppable, moving toward a planet they believed was helpless. They had 12 hours left to change course. They would need every second of it. The fleet reached Mars' orbit in silence, their massive ships casting shadows across the red planet's surface. They had stopped bothering to respond to Earth's communications. There was nothing left to say. Commander X sat in his command chair, watching the primitive blue planet grow larger on his displays. In 3 hours, they would be in optimal firing position. The demonstration attack would begin, and the humans would learn what happened to species who refused the Empire. In the mountain facility, the atmosphere had changed. The nervous energy of the past day had been replaced by something colder, more focused. Every person in the room knew exactly what they were about to do. There would be no more warnings, no more negotiations, no more chances for them to turn back. Admiral stood before the main tactical display, studying the enemy formation. The ships were grouped together, clearly not expecting any real threat. Their shields were active but not at maximum power. Their weapons were charging but slowly. They were treating this like a routine operation. "Doctor's status report," said. Doctor looked up from his console, his face pale but determined. "Aegis is ready for activation. All 300 satellite nodes are synchronized. Power draw is stable. Quantum entanglement is holding at 99.7% coherence. We can fire on your command." Technician Sara, a young woman who had joined the Aegis team only 2 years ago, raised her hand hesitantly. "Admiral, permission to speak." "Granted." "Ma'am, we've never tested the system at full power. We've run simulations, but this will be the first real-world activation. What if something goes wrong? What if the calculations are off?" It was the question everyone had been thinking but hadn't dared to ask. The Aegis system had been built in absolute secrecy. They couldn't risk testing it where other species might detect it. Everything they knew about how it would perform came from computer models and small-scale laboratory experiments. Doctor answered before could. "Sara, I've checked these calculations 10,000 times. My entire team has every equation, every power requirement, every targeting solution. The physics is sound. The engineering is solid. It will work." "But you can't be completely certain," Sara pressed. "No," Doctor admitted. "I can't be completely certain, but I am certain of what happens if we do nothing. That will destroy our cities, kill millions of our people, and enslave whoever survives. I would rather die trying to defend humanity than live on my knees." Sara nodded slowly and turned back to her console. Around the room, others straightened in their chairs. Doctor's words had reminded them all why they were here. General's voice came through the speakers from his command post in South Korea. "Admiral, ground forces are in position. All civilian populations are in the deep shelters. If they make it through, we'll make them fight for every meter of ground." "Understood," General replied, "but they won't make it through." On Defense Station Olympus, Captain watched the fleet through his forward viewports. The alien ships were beautiful in a terrible way, all sharp angles and aggressive design. He had tried everything he could think of to avoid this moment. Diplomacy, warnings, even threats. Nothing had worked. "Captain, we're receiving activation authorization from High Command," his tactical officer reported. Took a deep breath. Confirmed the order. Prepare to execute Aegis activation sequence on Admiral's command. In the command ship, was still studying the strange human satellites. The more he looked at them, the more wrong they seemed. The power readings were increasing steadily. The satellites were adjusting their positions with tiny thruster burns, creating a perfect geometric grid around the fleet. "Commander, those satellites are definitely doing something," said. "The power levels just spiked. They're drawing energy equivalent to the entire output of the human." "For research platforms," X said skeptically. "That's what concerns me, sir. What kind of research requires that much power?" Before X could answer, the sensors began screaming alerts. Gravitational anomalies were forming throughout space around the fleet. Small at first, barely detectable but growing rapidly. The sensors couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. The readings suggested impossible things, physics-breaking things. "What is that?" X demanded, staring at his displays. "I don't know, sir. The sensors are detecting massive gravitational distortions, but there's no mass to generate them. It's like space itself is collapsing." In the mountain facility, Doctor's hands moved across his control panel with practiced precision. He entered the final authorization codes, the ones that only he and Admiral possessed. The codes that would unleash what humanity had built in its darkest hours of fear and determination. "Aegis system is armed," Doctor announced. "Targeting solutions are locked. All nodes are synchronized. We are ready for activation." Admiral looked around the room one final time. She saw the faces of people who had dedicated their lives to this moment. Scientists who had sacrificed their careers. Engineers who had worked in secrecy for decades. Military officers who had trained for a war they prayed would never come, and it had come anyway. "This is Admiral to all Aegis stations," she said clearly. "We are about to activate a weapon that will destroy every ship in the fleet. There will be no survivors. This is not a decision I make lightly, but we have tried everything else. We have warned them. We have begged them to leave. They have chosen destruction, so we will give them what they chose. May history judge us fairly for what we are about to do. Activation in 10 seconds. Scientists began the countdown. 10, 9, 8. On the ships, alarms were now blaring throughout every vessel. The gravitational anomalies were multiplying, appearing faster than the computer could track them. Points of absolute darkness were forming in space, each one pulling at the fabric of reality itself. "Evasive maneuvers," X shouted. "Get us out of here." 765. The ships tried to move, their massive engines burning at full power. But they were too slow, too large, too confident in their invulnerability. The human satellites had positioned themselves perfectly, creating a killing field that no amount of speed or maneuverability could escape. 432. Finally understood what the satellites were. He understood the power readings, the positioning, the impossible gravitational distortions forming around his ship. He opened his mouth to warn his commander, but there wasn't time. 1. Activation. Doctor pressed the final control, and the Aegis system came to full power. 300 satellites fired simultaneously. Each one created a microscopic singularity, a tiny black hole precisely positioned and carefully controlled. The singularities appeared inside, beside, and around every ship in the fleet. They existed for only 0.3 of a second, but 0.3 of a second was more than enough. Gravity, the fundamental force of the universe, the power that held galaxies together and curved spacetime itself, focused on the fleet with surgical precision. Captain watched from the defense station as space seemed to twist and fold. The ships didn't explode. They didn't burn. They simply collapsed inward, crushed by gravitational forces strong enough to compress starship armor into the density of neutron stars. And then, as the singularities collapsed and released their energy, the compressed matter exploded outward in spheres of superheated plasma. The entire engagement lasted 4.7 seconds. When it was over, there were no ships, no escape pods, no distress signals, just an expanding debris field of ionized particles and twisted metal that had once been 847 warships and the thousands of crew members aboard them. In the mountain facility, technician Sora stared at her console in shock. The power levels were dropping back to normal. The satellites were shutting down their singularity generators. The system had worked exactly as designed. "Target elimination confirmed," she whispered. "All hostile vessels destroyed. No survivors detected." Doctor sat back in his chair, his hands shaking. They had done it. They had actually done it. Humanity had just announced to the galaxy that Earth was defended by a weapon unlike anything the known universe had ever seen. And they had done it in less than 5 seconds. The silence that followed was absolute. In the mountain facility, every person sat frozen at their stations, staring at displays that showed nothing but debris. The fleet, all 847 ships that had seemed so unstoppable just seconds ago, had simply ceased to exist. Observer was aboard the monitoring vessel Horizon's Eye, positioned at a safe distance from the battle zone. Her job was to record everything, to document humanity's first real engagement with an alien species. She had expected to film a desperate fight, possibly Earth's last stand. Instead, her cameras had captured something that would be studied for centuries. "Did anyone else see that?" she asked into her headset, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me the cameras recorded that." "Every sensor we have captured it," her technical officer replied, his voice shaking. "Multiple angles, full spectrum analysis, gravitational measurements, it's all here." Played back the footage in slow motion, watching frame by frame as the Aegis system had fired. The satellites had lit up simultaneously, creating points of absolute darkness in space. The darkness had spread to the ships, and then everything had happened too fast for the eye to follow. The massive warships had crumpled like paper in a fist, their hulls collapsing inward before exploding into clouds of superheated gas. "How many people were on those ships?" asked quietly. "Estimates suggest between 5,000 and 8,000 per capital ship, fewer on the smaller vessels. Total casualties estimated at 3 to 4 million. Felt sick. 3 to 4 million lives ended in less than 5 seconds. She knew they had been invaders, conquerors who would have killed billions of humans without hesitation, but the scale of what she had just witnessed was overwhelming. Fighter pilot Minyu had launched from Olympus Station just before the Aegis activation, part of the defensive screen in case any ship survived. He hung in space now, his fighter's systems idle, staring through his canopy at the expanding debris field. He had trained his entire life to fight aliens. He had imagined dogfights, desperate maneuvers, maybe even ramming his fighter into an enemy ship if that's what it took to protect Earth. He had not imagined this, the utter, complete destruction of an entire fleet in the time it took to blink. "Olympus control to all fighters," Captain's voice came through the comm system. "Hold position. Begin scanning for any escape pods or survivors. If you detect any life signs, mark the location but do not approach without authorization." Minyu activated his scanners, sweeping through the debris field. The computer analyzed thousands of objects, chunks of hull plating, pieces of interior structure, fragments of equipment. Not one single piece was larger than a small transport shuttle. The gravitational forces had torn everything apart at the molecular level. "Olympus Control, Fighter 7, Minyu reported. I'm not detecting any life signs, nothing larger than debris. It's like they were erased." "Confirmed, Fighter 7. Continue scanning." But Minyu knew they wouldn't find anyone. You couldn't survive being crushed by a black hole, even one that only existed for a fraction of a second. The crews had died instantly, probably without even knowing what was happening. In the mountain facility, Admiral forced herself to breathe slowly and stay focused. The battle was over, but her work wasn't finished. All stations, status report. I want confirmation that every system performed as expected. Reports came in rapid succession. The Aegis satellites were undamaged and powering down normally. The power grid was recovering from the massive draw. All defensive stations were intact. No human casualties. No equipment failures. The system had worked perfectly. "Doctor, can we fire again if we need to?" asked. Doctor checked his displays, running calculations in his head. The satellites need 4 hours to recharge their singularity generators. The power grid needs at least 6 hours to recover fully. If another fleet appeared right now, we could manage maybe a partial activation. 50 to 60 satellites instead of all 300. Would that be enough? Against a fleet this size? Yes. Against something larger, I don't know. General's voice came through the speakers. "Admiral, we're detecting increased activity from our deep space monitoring stations. Something happened out there beyond the fleet. Some kind of transmission." Felt cold dread settle in her stomach. What kind of transmission? "We're analyzing it now. But Admiral, it came from one of the ships right before we fired. They sent something on a tight beam quantum channel directed back toward their territory." President entered the control room, having watched the battle from an adjacent observation chamber. His face looked 10 years older than it had that morning. "Did we just start a war with an entire empire?" "We may have, sir," admitted. "If they sent a report home before we destroyed them, the Empire will know what happened here. They'll know we have a weapon that can destroy their fleets." "Will they come back?" "I don't know. Maybe they'll be smart and leave us alone. Maybe they'll send a bigger fleet for revenge. Maybe they'll try to negotiate. We won't know until they arrive, and given the distance involved, that could take decades." Doctor looked up from his console. "Sir, I'm analyzing the debris field's trajectory. Most of it will burn up in Jupiter's atmosphere over the next few months. Some of it will drift into the outer solar system, but we should recover some samples. We need to understand their technology." "Why?" President asked. "We already destroyed them." "Because they're not the only species out there, sir. We know that now. And the next ones might be stronger, smarter, or more prepared. We need to learn everything we can from this encounter." Captain coordinated the salvage operation from Olympus Station. Recovery ships moved carefully through the debris field, using remote drones to collect intact pieces of technology. It was dangerous work. Some of the debris was still radioactive from the plasma explosions. Other pieces were unstable, their power systems damaged but not fully dead. "Captain, Recovery 7 here," a pilot reported. "We've found something unusual. It looks like part of a data storage system, still partially intact." "Mark it as priority recovery," ordered. "Get it back to the analysis station immediately." As the recovery teams worked, found himself thinking about the crew members. They had been following orders, probably believed they were bringing civilization to a primitive species. Most of them had likely never questioned their empire's right to conquer. And now they were gone, killed by a species they had dismissed as insignificant. He wondered if they had families. If somewhere, 47 light-years away, there were parents, spouses, children who would never know what happened to their loved ones, who would wait for messages that would never come. Had realized the truth in his final second of life. The strange satellites, the power readings, the impossible gravitational distortions. The humans hadn't built a weapon. They had built hundreds of weapons, each one capable of creating localized black holes. It was insane. It was impossible. It violated every principle of safe technology that the galaxy followed. And it had worked. His last thought, as the singularity formed inside his ship's bridge and gravity began tearing everything apart, was that his empire had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed humanity was weak because their technology looked primitive. They had never considered that a species desperate enough, scared enough, and unified enough might build something so dangerous that even advanced civilizations would fear it. The Empire had conquered 200 worlds by following a simple rule: overwhelm the primitives with superior technology, and they would submit. That rule had just been proven catastrophically wrong. Observer compiled her report as the Horizon's Eye returned to Earth orbit. She included every piece of data, every recording, every measurement. Future historians would use this information to understand what humanity had done today. They would debate whether it was justified, whether it was necessary, whether it was heroic or monstrous. But already knew the answer. It was all of those things at once. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were not victims, not prey, not servants. They had shown that Earth was defended by something truly terrifying. And the message was clear: stay away or face the same fate as the debris field continued to expand, a monument to arrogance and a warning to anyone who might think Earth was an easy target. In the cold vacuum of space, the remains of 847 warships drifted silently, a graveyard that had appeared in less time than it took to breathe. 3 days after the battle, Earth was still trying to process what had happened. The civilian population had been told the truth. There was no point in hiding it anymore. The alien fleet had come to conquer them, and humanity had destroyed it completely. The celebrations were muted, confused. People didn't know whether to feel triumphant or terrified of what they had done. In the mountain facility, Ambassador studied the recovered data cores that Captain's teams had salvaged from the debris. The cores were damaged, but Earth's best technicians had managed to extract usable information. What they found changed everything. "Admiral, you need to see this," said, pulling up a holographic display in the command center. Admiral approached, along with President and Doctor. The display showed a star map with hundreds of systems marked in symbols. "What am I looking at?" "This is the Empire," explained. 214 conquered systems. Their territory spans 47 light years from there, and this is the important part. She highlighted a timestamp. Commander X sent an initial report back to his Empire 6 hours after they arrived. A standard contact report. It would have included basic information about Earth, our technology level, and their invasion plan. "So they know we exist," said quietly. "Yes, sir, but they don't know what happened to the fleet. Not yet. That report is traveling at light speed and won't reach for another 47 years. Any response would take another 47 years to reach us." Understood immediately. "We have 94 years before they could possibly send another fleet to investigate." "Assuming they do send one," Doctor added, "they might write this fleet off as lost and focus on easier targets. Or they might send everything they have to punish us," countered. "The data cores show that they are a proud species. They don't tolerate defeats. Every species that has destroyed even a single ship has been targeted for complete annihilation." Historian had been invited to the meeting to provide context. He was an elderly man who had spent his career studying military history and first contact scenarios. "The question is whether we wait 94 years to find out, or whether we take action now." "What kind of action?" asked. "We send them a message," said simply. "We tell them exactly what happened and why." The idea sparked fierce debate over the next several hours. Some argued that humanity should remain silent, giving themselves nearly a century to prepare for potential retaliation. Others insisted that silence would only make things worse, allowing them to build up false narratives about what had happened to their fleet. Ambassador was firmly in the second camp. "We need to control the narrative. If we send nothing, they'll assume we used some kind of treacherously. They might paint us as monsters who destroyed a peaceful exploration fleet. But if we send them the full context, the warnings we gave, the chances we offered, maybe they'll understand that we acted in self-defense. You're assuming they'll care about our perspective, General said via the video link. They're conquerors. They might just see this as a challenge. Then at least we'll know we tried, replied. And if they do come back, we'll have 94 years to prepare an even better defense. President listened to all the arguments before making his decision. We send the message. Ambassador drafts something that makes our position absolutely clear. We didn't want this war. We gave them every chance to leave, but we will not be victims. It took 2 days to craft the message. Every word was debated, every phrase analyzed for how it might be interpreted by an alien mind. They included video recordings of this initial arrival, the threats they had made, humanity's repeated warnings, and finally, footage of the battle itself. The message was simple and direct. You sent a fleet to conquer us. We destroyed it in 4.7 seconds. We took no pleasure in this. We did not want war, but we will not be slaves. We will not be victims. Your people had every opportunity to leave in peace. They chose violence, and violence found them. Earth is defended by technology you have never encountered. Technology that makes your shields worthless and your fleets fragile. If you send another fleet, it will meet the same fate. We offer you this one chance at peace. Learn from your dead, respect our sovereignty, leave us alone, or face what we have built. They attached complete technical specifications of the Aegis system, wanting them to understand exactly what they would face if they returned. It was a calculated risk. Sharing the technology might allow them to develop countermeasures, but it would also demonstrate that humanity was confident enough in their defenses to reveal them. How do we send this? Asked. The same way they sent their report. Doctor shook his head. We can do better. We have quantum burst transmission technology. It's experimental, but it should work. We can send this message and it will arrive at the almost instantly instead of taking 47 years. Do it, ordered. The message was transmitted through a network of quantum-entangled particles that Earth's scientists had been developing for deep space communication. The technology was young and had never been tested at such distances, but the calculations suggested it would work. Somewhere 47 light-years away, the message would arrive at a communication station. They would receive it, analyze it, and realize that their conquest fleet had been annihilated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. While the message traveled through the quantum network, Captain continued overseeing the salvage operation. His teams had recovered hundreds of pieces of technology. Most of it was too damaged to be useful, but some pieces were intact enough to study. Captain, we found something interesting in one of the crew quarters, a salvage officer reported. Personal items, photographs, data tablets, things like that. Examine the recovered items. The photographs showed crew members with what were clearly their families, spouses, children, parents. The images were touching in their normalcy. A couple standing together, tentacles intertwined. A young child holding what looked like a toy spaceship. An elderly with a crew member who might have been their offspring. They were people, said quietly. Not just soldiers, people with families and lives. Yes, sir, just like us. Carefully stored the personal items for later analysis. These would be important for humanity's understanding of the culture. But more than that, they were reminders that the beings humanity had killed were individuals with hopes and dreams and loved ones who would miss them. Doctor struggled with nightmares in the days following the battle. He would wake up seeing singularities forming, ships collapsing, lives ending. Scientists found him one morning in the laboratory, staring at the Aegis system schematics. You're wondering if we should have built it, said. I'm wondering if we should dismantle it, Doctor replied. This weapon is too powerful, too dangerous. What if we become the conquerors? What if having this kind of power corrupts us? That's why we have leaders like Admiral and President said. They understand the weight of this weapon. They won't use it lightly. But what about in 50 years? 100? What if future leaders aren't so careful? Didn't have an answer for that. It was a question humanity would have to grapple with for generations. Historian began compiling the official record of what would become known as the 4-Second War, the shortest military engagement in human history, the first confirmed contact with intelligent alien life, the moment when humanity announced to the galaxy that Earth was not an easy target. He interviewed everyone involved, from Admiral to technician Sora to the fighter pilots who had watched the battle. Each person had a different perspective, a different emotional response. But they all agreed on one thing: they had done what was necessary to protect their species. "Will there be another war?" a young assistant asked. "Probably," the historian replied honestly. "The galaxy is vast and we've only met one species. There will be others. Some might be peaceful, some might be even more aggressive than the. All we can do is be ready." 94 years seemed like a long time, but humanity immediately began preparing for the possibility of this return. New defensive satellites were built. The Aegis system was expanded and improved. Deep space monitoring stations were established to detect any approaching fleets years before they arrived. But they also prepared for peace. Humanity began building ships capable of exploring beyond their solar system. They established protocols for first contact that emphasized communication and mutual respect. They created a new department whose sole purpose was understanding alien psychology and culture. On a colony world, 47 light-years from Earth, a quantum communication station received a strange transmission. The technicians analyzed it with growing alarm and immediately forwarded it to the Imperial Command. Within hours, the message had reached the Emperor himself. He watched the footage of his fleet's destruction in complete silence. 847 ships, gone in less than 5 seconds. The humans had not lied. They possessed a weapon unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. A weapon that rendered shields useless and turned the Empire's pride into expanding clouds of debris. The Emperor studied the star charts, finding the small yellow star where Earth orbited. It was an insignificant system, far from any strategic resources. The only reason the Empire had sent a fleet there was because it was routine. They conquered everything they encountered. But this time, it had cost them everything. The Emperor closed his viewing screen and called his military advisors. They would need to discuss this carefully. Did they seek revenge for the lost fleet? Did they attempt peaceful contact? Did they simply mark that region of space as forbidden and move on? He looked at the human message one more time, reading the final line: "Leave us alone, or face what we have built." The Emperor made his decision. He would do what no ruler had done in 3 centuries. He would respect the warning.